You've seen it happen. A sudden tweet over the weekend, a tariff threat that seems to come out of absolutely nowhere, and then, boom, Monday morning the markets are in a free fall. It all feels so chaotic, right? So unpredictable? But what if I told you it's not? What if it's all part of a very deliberate, very repeatable playbook? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and take a look.
And that right there is the big question, isn't it? Are these sudden tariff announcements just random, impulsive decisions, or are we actually watching a calculated strategy unfold, one that's designed to get a very specific result? Well, when you start connecting the dots, the evidence really points in one direction.
We've all seen headlines just like this one. The announcement always seems to hit when the markets are closed, which, just maximizes the psychological gut punch. Nobody can react right away, so that uncertainty just builds and builds. And then when that opening bell rings, the selling is fast and furious. It is a shock to the system, and that's exactly what it's designed to be. But here's the thing. Once you see the pattern, all that chaos starts to look a lot more like a well-rehearsed performance. There's definitely a method to the madness, and it follows this really distinct three-phase cycle. So let's unlock it. Okay, this is the most crucial point to understand. The primary goal here isn't actually to implement tariffs. No. Instead, the threat of tariffs is used as a weapon, a tool to deliberately stir up market volatility. It forces traders to dump their leverage positions, and ultimately it pressures the other side into negotiations from a much weaker position. And this is it, the whole playbook laid out in 3 simple steps. First up, you have the shock phase, that weekend announcement that triggers a massive sell-off. Then, just as the panic is hitting its peak, we move into the narrative phase. This is where officials suddenly pop up with all this calming talk about constructive discussions. And finally, you get the resolution phase. A deal gets done, or maybe just delayed, the uncertainty disappears, and the markets rally hard. Shock, calm, rally. It's the same cycle, over and over again. So let's put a formal definition on this. A market control mechanism, at least in this context, isn't about setting prices or anything like that. It's really about manufacturing a crisis on demand. By threatening these tariffs, you create a volatile storm that basically forces the financial system itself, we're talking margin calls, risk models, to start selling assets. And that forced selling, that's what creates the leverage you need at the negotiating table.
Now you might be thinking, okay, that's a pretty bold theory, but this is not the first time we've seen this playbook run, not by a long shot. So let's rewind the tape and look at some past examples where this exact pattern played out.
And when you look back, the pattern is it's remarkably consistent. We saw it again and again during that multi-year trade war with China. We saw it used to push Mexico and Canada into that new USMCA trade deal. A very similar thing happened with India. And now, as the source material projects, we are seeing the exact same playbook deployed again in 2026, only this time with the massive geopolitical stakes of Greenland. So let's just zero in on the China episode for a second. Remember this? The threat goes out, usually over a weekend, the headlines start flashing, and the market immediately prices in the absolute worst-case scenario. This right here is the shock phase in its purest form, just a giant wave of fear and forced selling. And then, after some time passes, with all the negotiations and calming rhetoric, this happens, the resolution phase. A deal, even if it's just a partial one, gets announced. The threat is gone, the uncertainty collapses, and all of that selling pressure just reverses into this incredibly powerful rally. I mean, this just illustrates the full cycle perfectly.
And it wasn't a one-off with China. Nope, the same 3-act play, threat followed by a nasty market reaction and then an eventual deal, was used against Mexico, Canada, and India. Every single time, the market chaos itself became a key piece of the negotiation strategy.
Okay, so that brings us to the most recent, and let's be honest, probably the most ambitious use of this playbook, the Greenland Gambit. And this time, it's not just about trade deficits. The stakes are geopolitical, and they are much, much higher. So the playbook is the same, but the details are pretty extraordinary. On January 18th, a threat of 10% tariffs, escalating all the way to 25%, was announced against 8 key European nations. And the condition to make it all go away, the complete and total purchase of Greenland. I mean, that is a major, major escalation from past demands. And the market reaction? Well, it was immediate and totally predictable. This is the shock phase playing out exactly as the playbook says it should. On January 19th and 20th, both US and European markets sold off sharply as all those risk models kicked in and traders just scrambled to get out of the way of this new uncertainty. So what makes this time different?
Well, the tactic, that three-phase playbook, it's identical. But the targets? Now we're talking about close NATO allies, not just economic rivals. And the response is different too. Europe is gearing up for a massive, symmetrical retaliation of 93 billion euros. Plus, this whole thing is happening while the Supreme Court is reviewing presidential tariff authority, which adds this whole other layer of legal drama. The game is the same, but the board is way more complex.
So if this whole thing is a predictable cycle, what does that mean for you? How do you navigate it? Well, understanding the playbook is really the first step to not getting caught in the crossfire.
During that initial shock from the Greenland announcement, look at this number. It is staggering. $815 million. That's the value of leveraged Bitcoin positions that were liquidated, just force sold, as the price dropped. And that brings us to the really surprising role that crypto plays in this whole thing.
A lot of people think of Bitcoin as digital gold, right? A safe place to hide when things get chaotic. But the reality during these tariff shocks is the complete opposite. Because it trades 24/7 and has all this leverage, it actually acts as a high beta risk valve. When fear spikes over the weekend, Bitcoin is one of the only liquid assets global traders can sell immediately to cut their risk. So it often drops first, and it drops fastest.
So what's the big takeaway here? First, this predictable volatility can actually be an opportunity, but only if you understand the phases. Second, high leverage is your absolute enemy during that shock phase. It's what leads to that forced selling. Third, listening for that subtle shift in language to the narrative phase can be a huge signal that the worst might be over. And finally, you have to recognize Bitcoin not as a safe haven in this specific game, but as a very sensitive barometer for market fear.
And all of this leaves us with one final, really fascinating question. This entire strategy works because it relies on a predictable market reaction to a manufactured shock. But what happens when everybody, traders, investors, even foreign governments, what happens when they all know the playbook? Can you still control the market when everyone knows exactly what game you're playing?